Okay. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Okay, so today we will do a short reading continuing the Majjhima Nikaya number 10, the Satipattana Sutta. So where we last stopped was on mindfulness of mind, contemplating mind as mind. So today we will continue from section 36, Contemplation of Mind-Objects. So for those who are following, we are reading from the text translated by Bhikkhu Nyanamoli and Bhikkhu Bodhi. So on the printed text, it's on page 151. Contemplation of mind-objects. And how, students, does a student abide contemplating mind objects as mind objects? Here, a student abides contemplating mind objects as mind objects in terms of the five hindrances. And how does a student abide contemplating mind objects as mind objects in terms of the five hindrances? Here, there being sensual desire in him, a student understands there is sensual desire in me. Or there being no sensual desire in him, he understands there is no sensual desire in me. And he also understands how there comes to be the arising of unarisen sensual desire, and how there comes to be the abandoning of arisen sensual desire, and how there comes to be the future non-arising of abandoned sensual desire. So in the next paragraph, I will repeat. So I will read the text, but instead of reading it as ... as how Bhante Vimalaramsi would like us to read, I will try my best to read with the repetition, if that's okay. There being ill will in him or her, a student understands there is ill will in me, or there being no ill will in me, he understands there is no ill will in me. And he also understands how there comes to be the arising of unarisen ill will, and how there comes to be the abandoning of arisen ill will, and how there comes to be the future non-arising of abandoned ill will. There being sloth and torpor in him, a student understands there is sloth and torpor in me. Or there being no sloth and torpor in him, he understands there is no sloth and torpor in me. And he also understands how there comes to be the arising of unarisen, sloth and torpor, and how there comes to be the abandoning of arisen, sloth and torpor, and how there comes to be the future non-arising of abandoned sloth and torpor. There being restlessness and remorse in him, a student understands there is restlessness and remorse in me. Or there being no restlessness and remorse in him, he understands there is no restlessness and remorse in me. And he also understands how there comes to be the arising of unarisen restlessness and remorse, and how there comes to be the abandoning of arisen restlessness and remorse, and how there comes to be the future non-arising of restlessness and remorse. There being doubt in him, a student understands there is doubt in me. Or there being no doubt in him, he understands there is no doubt in me. And he understands how there comes to be the arising of unarisen doubt, and how there comes to be the abandoning of arisen doubt, and how there comes to be the future non-arising of abandoned doubt. Okay, so I will just pause there for a moment in case anyone wants to ask a question at this stage. Okay, if not, does anyone have a question? Am I reading too slow or too fast or okay?
Okay.
Okay. So I'm trying my best to follow the twin tradition as much as I can. Okay. So then I will continue with the next paragraph, still on the mind objects. In this way, he abides contemplating mind objects as mind objects internally, or he abides contemplating mind objects as mind objects externally, or he abides contemplating mind objects as mind objects both internally and externally, or else he abides contemplating in mind objects their nature of arising, or he abides contemplating in mind objects their nature of vanishing, or he abides contemplating in mind objects their nature of both arising and vanishing, or else mindfulness that there are mind objects is simply established in him to the extent necessary for bare knowledge and mindfulness. and he abides independent, not clinging to anything in the world. That is how a student abides contemplating mind objects as mind objects in terms of the five hindrances. So that was section 37. So again, I'll pause in case anyone has any questions at this stage. Does everyone have a good understanding of what mind objects are? Mrs. Sindhu, if I'm not sure if you have good reception. So Pai has a question. Is mind objects the same as thoughts?
Mind object, whatever we are perceiving through our mind, it's not only through thoughts, it's even sometimes through perception. While we are meditating, we have an insight. That insight is also sometimes, if you go into thought, it's kind of like proliferation into our mind. But when we say what we are perceiving, the way we are accepting the things in our mind, the way we are understanding is other than the thoughts. It is different. That's my understanding.
Okay. Is it then in terms of the five aggregates, the other four aggregates other than the body?
Actually, what happens is there are these formations, perception and consciousness. All these come into like mind object. When we start perceiving the things, it starts with our perception and consciousness together, along with the formations that the sankaras through our knowledge of Dhamma talks. We see that, okay, now this is happening in our practice. And we could able to see that now the mind is rested in loving kindness. Or if the mind is like distracted, we are just perceiving. I'm going to think like mind, okay, now you go into thinking, or I want the mind to go get into thinking. That we just perceiving the mind. Mind objects is whatever the mind contacts that are happening are all the mind objects. For the body, for the eyes, we have eye contact, ear contact. In the same way, for the mind, we have mind objects as. Is the internet connection stable?
Yes, it's okay. Okay. So, hi, did that answer your question okay? Okay, so I think so, right? Jay has a question. I'll read Jay's question. Is perception and consciousness coming together, or feeling and perception comes together?
Actually, perception and feeling come together. But without consciousness, we cannot have any perception, and without contact, without any contact, without consciousness, we do not have perception or feeling. For the contact to happen, for the feeling to arise from our sense basis, we need to have the consciousness through our eye, through our nose, whatever six senses we have. To happen, we need contact. For contact, looking eye, the external form, and the consciousness. So there also there is a consciousness. So consciousness, feeling, and perception are all like when you go into cessation, there is cessation of feeling, perception, and consciousness. So all these three come together. They are there until we go to cessation.
Okay. Jay has a follow-up question there. Perception. So he's asking, is that part of the mind that names a feeling.
Yes, perception is a part of the mind that names. It's not always with the feeling, but sometimes we just feel like when you have equanimity. We don't always keep our mind like have that perception going, but the feeling is there. We just feel it rather than we have that mindfulness established that the mind is in equanimous state. When we start perceiving if it's loving kindness, if you want to investigate, then the perception will name you. Okay, now your mind is in this state.
So just to clarify, I guess. Okay, so Jay says, okay, so all the three come together. Yes, indeed. I can't remember. I think it's MN 43 or MN 44 that explains this. Is it the question and answer, Mahavedala or Chula Vedala Sutta? Sorry, I'm not an expert yet, but it's the one where my heroine, if I may say, Venerable Dhammadina is my heroine, has that conversation.
Really, yes. And at the end, in each jhana where we are doing, there are some aggregates, there are some characteristics of jhana that we keep leaving behind. The first jhana, we leave behind the hindrances. In the same way, when we get to the nothingness, and after that, when we enter the cessation, when there is that, after the eighth jhana, when cessation happens, then we let go of cessation of perception, feeling, and consciousness. Even in nothingness, even in neither perception nor non-perception, there is still perception that is happening, there is still feeling that is happening, there is still consciousness. We actually cannot let go of it intentionally, but when the conditions are right, when the 7 factors of enlightenment are right, they get seized.
Thank you. Jay, does that answer your question? I hope that does answer the question. If not, we can always do a follow-up reading of Mahavedala and Chula Vedala Sutta. So the next section is on the 5 aggregates. Should I continue? Is everyone happy for me to continue? Okay, so I'll read section 38 on the 5 aggregates. Again, students, a student abides contemplating mind objects as mind objects in terms of the 5 aggregates affected by clinging. Here, again, usually Bhante Vimala Ramsi will stop here and say, in terms of the 5 aggregates affected by craving and clinging. So just trying to, as much as possible, emulate him. And how does a student abide contemplating mind objects as mind objects in terms of the 5 aggregates affected by craving and clinging? Here, a student understands such is material form, such its origin, such its disappearance, such is feeling, such its origin, such its disappearance. Such is perception, such its origin, such its disappearance. Such are the formations, such their origin, such their disappearance. Such is consciousness, such its origin, such its disappearance. So my apologies, I should have read right through passage 38 because we just answered the question. Passage 38 was a full answer to Pai's question. So my apologies, obviously I didn't do my homework, but there you go. Pai, your question has been answered thoroughly in section 38. So my apologies again. Section 39. Most welcome. Section 39. In this way, he abides contemplating mind objects as mind objects internally, externally, and both internally and externally. There's a ... here, but I'm not sure where that ... refers back to. And then here it says, and he abides independent, not clinging to anything in the world. That is how a student abides, contemplating mind objects as mind objects in terms of the five aggregates affected by craving and clinging. So that was mind objects with reference to craving and five aggregates affected by craving and clinging. Sorry. The next section is on the 6 bases. Shall we continue or shall we leave that for the next session? What say the audience? Continue? Okay. Mrs. Sindhu, you're muted.
I think we can continue because we still have time, and even for them who are listening offline when it's recorded, it
yes.
continuous session.
Okay, so there is the 6 bases, and then after that, but after that is the 7 factors of enlightenment, and then the 4 noble truths, and then insight. So maybe we just do up to the 6 bases for today, and then we can leave the 7 factors of enlightenment, 4 noble truths, and insight in a follow-up session. How's that sound? Okay with everyone? It's fine. Okay, and I see Paul nodding as well. Sounds good. Awesome. Okay, so now we go to the 6 bases. Again, students, a student abides contemplating mind objects as mind objects in terms of the 6 internal and external bases. And how does a student abide contemplating mind objects as mind objects in terms of the 6 internal and external bases? Here, a student understands the I. He understands forms. And he understands the fetter that arises dependent on both. And he also understands how there comes to be the arising of the unarisen fetter, and how there comes to be the abandoning of the arisen fetter, and how there comes to be the future non-arising of the abandoned fetter. He understands the ear. He understands sounds. And he understands the fetter that arises dependent on both. And he also understands how there comes to be the arising of the unarisen fetter, and how there comes to be the abandoning of the arisen fetter, and how there comes to be the future non-arising of the abandoned fetter. He understands the nose. He understands odors. And he understands the fetter that arises dependent on both. And he also understands how there comes to be the arising of the unarisen fetter, and how there comes to be the abandoning of the arisen fetter, and how there comes to be the future non-arising of the abandoned fetter. He understands the tongue. He understands flavors. And he understands the fetter that arises dependent on both. And he also understands how there comes to be the arising of the unarisen fetter, and how there comes to be the abandoning of the arisen fetter, and how there comes to be the future non-arising of the abandoned fetter. He understands the body. He understands tangibles. He understands the fetter that arises dependent on both. And he also understands how there comes to be the arising of the unarisen fetter, and how there comes to be the abandoning of the arisen fetter, and how there comes to be the future non-arising of the abandoned fetter. He understands the mind. He understands mind objects. And he understands the fetter that arises dependent on both. And he also understands how there comes to be the arising of the unarisen fetter, and how there comes to be the abandoning of the arisen fetter, and how there comes to be the future non-arising of the abandoned fetter. In this way, he abides contemplating mind objects as mind objects, internally, externally, and both internally and externally. And he abides independent, not craving and clinging to anything in the world. That is how a student abides contemplating mind objects as mind objects in terms of the 6 internal and external bases. So that was up to the section on the 6 bases, both internal and external bases. Are there any questions from today's participant? Pai has a question. Yes, please shoot. When he uses fetter, Just waiting. Okay. Does he mean craving? Okay, so the question is the word fetter. Does it mean craving, or does he mean that these things are intrinsically problematical in their own right? Okay, let me try to understand the question. So I'll repeat again. In other words, so we're just waiting for Pi to, okay. Is it a problem that okay, I see what you mean. So when he's using the word fetters here, and then he's okay, so I'll read again. He understands forms, and he understands the fetter that arises dependent. Sorry, here a student understands the I. He understands forms, and he understands the fetter that arises dependent on both. I see what you mean. So your question is whether the fetter that is arising dependent on both, does that mean it's a problem that we have eyes and form? That's not the problem. But Mrs. Sindhu, maybe you want to clarify the answer to this question? Because it's a very common question. So I'll repeat again the question. So the question, so in the text, here a student understands the I, he understands forms. So that's the internal and the external base. And he understands the fetter. The fetter, I think if I remember correctly, fetter is hindrance. We can Google it. So here a student understands the I, he understands form, and he understands the fetter that arises dependent on both. So the question from Pi is, in other words, does that mean that because we have I and because there is form, that's where the problem is? My understanding is that's not where the problem is. So we have I and there are forms. The problem comes when we crave, when there is tension and tightness arising. And it comes from, again, the taking things personally. So, and this is just my understanding, of course, anyone can correct me. My understanding is, so in the first of the Noble Eightfold Path, what's commonly translated as right view, or how Bhante translated as harmonious perspective. So that first step really is understanding that everything is impersonal. But because of our habitual tendencies, we take everything as personal, everything that's happening as personal. So my understanding here is when the I, and so this is again coming from the Chachaka Sutta. So when the I sees the form, so when the I meets the form, then I consciousness occurs. The meeting of the three is where contact happens. And then from contact, you have feeling. And then from feeling, craving arises. So that whole section occurs as part of the human physiological, I hope I got that right, process. And it occurs very quickly. That's what makes us human. But that's not the problem. So if we remember Sister Kema's workshop on the dependent origination, the course that she gave, the video on YouTube, where she explains, she doesn't dive so much into that section of the 12 links. She's more focused on the point at which the craving arises, or in Pali they call tanha, and craving manifests. And this was clarified by Rajiv Ji the other day. the tension and tightness in the mind and in the body is not the craving itself, but craving manifests as tension and tightness in the body. So that's why the 6 R's are so useful, because the 6 R's literally, if we know how to use it correctly, is the antidote, the direct antidote to that link of craving in the 12 links. And this is what the Buddha discovered. He discovered that out of the 12 links in the dependent origination, this particular link is the easiest to cut off. So when we are going through the whole purpose of the practice, really, my understanding, so again, anyone can correct me here, but my understanding is the whole purpose of this practice really is to figure out how to cut that link, that point at which is the easiest to break. So if any one of you recall some of the talks where Sister Kema had drawn a wheel. So in one picture, she showed the wheel. And then in the subsequent picture, she showed how the structure of the wheel was broken. That means the 12 links are no longer continuously in cycle. And that's because that link where craving arises is broken. And so how do we get to that is through the practice of constantly, the Noble Eightfold Path is the practice. And by using the practice, using the 6 R's, which is the right effort, that's essentially that's the goal that we want to get to go through the different levels of the jhanas, and then go through the, point where, just as Mrs. Sindhu just mentioned, to the state of ceasing cessation, ceasing perception, feeling, and consciousness. And that's where we start to see. And one thing that I'm reminded again, when Bhante had a question, what is jhana? And Bhante's reply was, if you all recall, jhana literally is level of understanding. And personally, I do agree that that's probably one of the better translations I can understand and think of. Jhanas really are a level of understanding. Level of understanding of what? My understanding is basically whatever we see, hear, smell, taste, touch, or are conscious of, including mind objects, the level of understanding of how we are taking that in, the 6 sense bases. So whatever occurs through the 6 sense base, internally, externally, and how we understand that process. So every time we go through different levels of understanding, that's essentially what's happening. So also in that process, like Mrs. Sindhu was saying, we are letting go of, it could be past hindrances, old habits, whatever you want to call it, fetters. That's basically what's happening. Mrs. Sindhu, do you have anything to add there?
No, actually, but I just want to refer back to the same sutta that we just read, where, like you said, May, the understanding, the level of understanding, what we are talking about, the jhana, and after each observing mind objects, the hindrances part, there is a para where it says, inventing and so they observe meditating and both internally and externally. And here when you go through this para, it is wholly dependent upon the he understands that the mind is here, he understands that the mind is here, he understands that there is no craving if there is arisen. And here we can see the five hindrances that we have. All these, it is, we can see these five hindrances in the sutta have been put along with the right effort, the right mindfulness and right effort being practiced together through the 6 hours. And in the five aggregates as well, they understand the eye, the ear, the eye, the forms, the ears and the sounds, nose and smells, taste, tongue, body and touches, mind and mind objects. All these sentences start with they understand or he understands. Student understands. What are they understanding? If the mind is perceiving something, if it's having an object, it's having then through and understanding where the mind is. Is it in the hindrance? Is it getting attached to it? Is it clinging to it? Is it holding on? See the arising and the passing to arise. How the arisen fetter comes to not arise again in future. The dependent origin. There is, when you 6 hour that hindrance, then it will not happen once again in the dependent origination. Because the link has already been gone. When you break that, then it will not arise again. So its energy will be reduced. And when it comes to the 6 hours, what happened with it? Like we have right view. We know that if the mind is hindrance, what is the origin, the craving of the soul? Then we are letting it go. This is the first noble truth that we are incomplete. And then we are practicing right effort. We are practicing right mindfulness. Only if we are mindful, then only we can do the 6 hour. All these eightfold path is being included into 6 hour steps. And when we 6 hour and come back to the object of meditation as loving kindness or any of the Brahma Viharas, then our mind is being collected. Then collectionist mind gets established. And this mindfulness sutta has like all the aspects. We can see the four noble truths. We can see arising, passing away, dependent origination. There is right effort. There is four noble truths. All of these things are covered in this sutta. Anybody has it?
Yeah, thank you, Mrs. Sindhu. So because your connection is quite bad, so I will try to summarize what I managed to capture basically in summary. Actually, in summary, what Mrs. Sindhu just clarified was this sentence in the text that is constantly repeated by the Buddha after every section, and that is, and he abides independent, not craving, clinging to anything in the world. And that is how the student contemplates, whether it's the body, the feeling, the mind, or the mind objects. That's how he contemplates them. Independent, that means, like Mr. Sindhu was saying, using the right effort, the 6 hours, together with right mindfulness or collectedness, harmonious collectedness, using that together to really understand that whatever we see, hear, smell, taste, touch, we are independent of it. Again, not taking it personal. So I hope that was a fair summary of Mrs. Sindhu's comments there. So we do appreciate, Mrs. Sindhu, your time, even though you're traveling somewhere with bad connection. So it's very helpful. Are there any other questions?
Audible now?
It's okay, but sometimes it breaks up depending on where you are. I think we're losing you again. Okay. Anyway, we have done quite a bit of reading today, so I hope that was beneficial to everyone who's on the call. And personally, I just want to share my experience that smiling helps a lot. And during the day at work or whenever I'm faced with challenging situations, I just remind myself to smile through it, whether it's physical, mental, or emotional discomfort. At the moment I remind myself to smile through it, literally just keep smiling and having that faith that, you know, it does work. So the smiling really, like what Bhante Vimaramsi, Sister Kema Bhante Dhammagavisi used to say, the whole 6 hour, the whole practice, really, if you want to really simplify and compress it into like this, really just smile. just keep smiling, like literally no matter what. And I personally, I find that to be one of the most useful practice. Okay, so Mrs. Sindhu had a quick text. That's okay. I will share in text. Today, we went to Mahabodhi, Hyderabad in India. We offered robes and attended the Katina Chivara Dana ceremony. May all beings share the merit. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. So for those who don't know what Katina Chivara means, so Katina is a ceremony that marks the end of the rains retreat. So this traces back to when during the Buddha's time, when during the rainy season, so the monks had to stay in a particular location instead of traveling. And so the people who host them at the end of the 3 months have like a simple dana ceremony, a ceremony of giving. So usually there is offering of robes and katina chivara. So it's like there's like a kind of a major robe. I don't know so much in India, but back in Malaysia, it used to be normally there's one main sponsor, like a main layperson kind of thing, and they will offer like a special robe to the head monk. So I'm not sure if it's the same practice in India. And then, of course, we can offer other requisites. So the common requisites are, of course, food, medicinal, anything that's useful for the monastics. So sadhu, 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 Mrs. Sindhu and your family for your meritorious act, and also that yeah, indeed all beings share the merits, and this can bring much happiness to all beings and to you and your family as well. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. So if that's okay with everyone, we can end today's session by sharing the merits together. So feel free to come up if you like, and we can recite the sharing of merits together. May suffering ones be suffering free, and the fearless be. May the grieving shed all grief, and may all beings find relief. May all beings share this merit that we have justified for the acquisition of all kinds of happiness. May beings inhabiting space and devas and nagas of mind power share this merit of ours. May they long protect the Buddha's dispensation. Thank you, everyone.
Beings be happy.
Thank
you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you for dialing in, even though you're traveling. Much appreciated. Okay, thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Mei. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Have a nice day.